in the meeting already. Whatever that scale, that is where we build that different world that we seek. The subtitle is Reflections from the Field, and I'm going to use this time to tell a few stories. The field refers to a kind of a disciplinary understanding of that, and otherwise. I fashioned myself a critical human geographer, and so the field has a particular connotation as a site of knowledge production. And it's also a term used by non-government organizations, and I've worked for several, that send people to places thought of as far away. And so that's another understanding of the field. Also the field of education. I know my sister and I are both educators, and that's a field that we're part of, and I draw in that as well. So because this is Rotary, also another starting point for this time of reflection is my 2 years that I spent at the Rotary Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution in Buenos Aires in Argentina. The photograph that you see here is of the Escuela Mecánica de la Armada, the Navy Mechanics School. And this photograph I took as a screenshot from Google Earth. So it's just from last year. But I saw that building when I was there, and I knew about that building before I went to Argentina. Many of you will remember that Argentina went through a dirty war in the 70s into the 80s, in which the country was controlled by a military government that used forced disappearance and as a disciplinary technique in which 30,000 people are thought to have been killed. And many of the people that were disappeared were actually held in this building that you see here. And I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes. But what I think is striking is kind of the reimagining of this space through the signs, Nunca Más, never again, and the other kind of banners that are on that building at least a few months ago that kind of reshaped that. It was a very formative time for me to be in Argentina in those years, not so long after the dirty war. Before that, I had worked as a human rights worker with community peacemaker teams. I'd worked as a teacher in an alternative school with young people who were marginalized from the regular schools. And since then, I've done a number of things that were mentioned earlier. I'm going to use, see if I can advance my slides. Maybe not. So I'm going to use this time I have with you, and I should just check the time. To tell a couple of stories. Marshall Gantz is a writer, a social change writer that I use with my students, and Gantz underlines that stories tell us teach us morals and values and lessons. But Gantz goes beyond that and says that public narrative is key to building the new world of peace and justice that we seek. And Gantz says that we start with our stories of self, why you were called to what you've been called to. So why are you here at Rotary? It's part of your stories. But the story of us has to do with those shared purposes, the goals, the vision, and the story of now has to do with the challenge that this community now faces and what we are doing about the challenges that we face. Maybe I'll just leave it in this mode. Can you still see the slide at this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just leave it in that format. Two longstanding commitments that have the word community in it that I've had are community peacemaker teams and the community worker program at George Brown College. And so I thought I'd just name a little bit about those, and as I'm going to tell some stories from them. CPT places teams at the invitation of local peacemaking communities that are confronting situations of lethal violence. And these teams support and amplify the voices of local peacemakers who risk injury and death by waging nonviolent direct action to confront systems of violence and oppression. And the community worker program prepares students to work for progressive social change with organizations, communities, and individuals across a range of issues such as poverty, housing, legal rights, discrimination, food, justice, and settlement. So it's been said that a picture tells a story, and this photograph tells a bit of a story. You can see that the building, you can see the old name there at the top, Escuela de Guerra Naval, School of Naval War, or Naval Warfare. This building is next to that other one, the School of the Navy Mechanics School, where that was used to house people that had been forcibly disappeared before they were killed. And in this building, I actually had some classes as part of my time as a Rotary Peace Fellow. And it was a bit of a jarring experience in the sense that we were physically in this space where so much harm had happened. This building, though, and you can tell from the second name, is now the Archivo Nacional de la Memoria, the National Archive of Memory. And so this is now a museum that holds the patrimony of the country to remember that time of violence, of violation of rights. So the master's in international relations that was that I completed at the Universidad del Salvador was a joint project actually with Rotary, but also with the Argentine military, which was for many of the Rotary fellows kind of a surprise because a lot of us had done various kinds of work for peace and social justice, non-government organizations, civil society organizations, and often the military was not part of that. So that was kind of a surprise, as I said, but also became kind of an opportunity for learning. And there were two experiences that we had that, in particular, well, to start with, a third of the students in our master's program were from the Argentine military. And so that was interesting in itself. But another third were local Argentines, and then the third was those of us on Rotary fellowships from different parts of the world. And together we took a course on international negotiation that was based in a crisis simulation. It was a compulsory course, and it took place on the military base and in the building that you can see here. The other course that I took with them was called Complex Operations, and actually took place at the Argentine Center for Peacekeeping Operations. And it was there, I think it took me half the course to realize what they exactly meant by complex operations. And maybe I'll come back to that. But the simulation exercise that we did, the 30 students or so in the international relations program, involved imagining that we were leadership from 3 different countries, and the countries were called green, gray, and blue, and they were part of a continent that you've never heard of called Atlantica, that's there between America and Africa. And so the Argentine military leaders that led us in this simulation had a lot of experience, particularly in peacekeeping in Haiti at that point. And I think a lot of what we did in this time of simulation was based on their experience. But it was a fascinating 5 weeks where we gathered together for a day each week to understand kind of the simulation exercise. Then we spent 3 weeks kind of going through what they called movements, where different things happened between these countries. And so the 3 different countries became our countries. I was in the country of Green, and Green had a population of 76 million, almost half rural and 25% illiterate. Blue, on the other hand, was half the size at 36 million, 92% literate, and only a very small percentage was rural, and gray was somewhere in between. And some of us were part of the foreign affairs for each country, and others were part of the military leadership. And I found myself as the head of Green's military, which was a role that I felt rather poorly equipped for, especially when the people leading the program were military leaders. And for Green, the president of the country ended up being a guy named Gert Danielson, who was a Rotary Fellow from Norway. Fascinating. During this time, we were in that building. We were in 6 different rooms. Each country had 3 rooms, and our communications, or 2 rooms, and the communication was by telephone, by email, by messenger system. Sometimes there would be press releases. It was quite elaborate. They would literally have like news accounts would come out on the television to tell us that something had happened, and we as the military leaders, or we as the Foreign Affairs Department or the president, had to respond. And we would learn, oh, there was illegal fishing off the course of one country, and another country was upset, and different parts of society were involved, and there were protests, and we had to figure out ways to keep the peace with all the different parts of society involved. And then there was another dispute around an oil platform, and different countries got involved, including their militaries, and then countries from far away we were told became involved, and we had to react and respond and kind of try to figure out a way forward in kind of these international disputes that involve all kinds of levels of society, both within the countries and beyond. In the third movement, though, we were told that there was evidence that a terrorist group that had taken over an oil platform off the coast of a couple of the countries had a dirty nuclear bomb. Until then, none of the countries had used military action. There were opportunities where we always shied away from that. And really, this was a part of the game where we were supposed to recognize that we had to get our militaries involved, that this was not a situation where kind of soft power was appropriate. But our president, Gert Danielson, from the Rotary Fellow from Norway, led us on a very strong position of negotiating with the terrorists who had the dirty nuclear bomb. And so this kind of continued through the last part of the exercise, that third movement, and then never really got resolved. It kind of was left rather muddy. The leaders of the exercise just couldn't fathom this direction. And so it just made their game not seem to work for them. They just couldn't really imagine this. So there was a real kind of disruption of vision, and that continued in our kind of debriefing of the exercise. And that's really striking for me, that difference in imagining possible ways forward is really significant. And to some extent, those of us, for most of the Peace Fellows, we couldn't imagine that a military operation solution was the only way forward. So there was a bit of a disconnect here. I think, as an aside, it's interesting to know that Gert Danielson went on to work for the United Nations, for UNDP, for a number of years, and was later actually kidnapped himself in Yemen about 10 years ago. And early on in his, while he was kidnapped, he was able to negotiate with the terrorist group that had kidnapped him a chance to get a message, a video message, I think, to his dad. And his message was, "Dad, don't make this a bigger thing than it is," which I thought was pretty telling of some family dynamics. But he was released after about 12 days through negotiations, and did continue to work for the United Nations for a number of years, and is now a consultant, has his own business on nonviolent communication. So that's kind of one long story that I wanted to tell. Another one starts with this photograph. This is actually just a few weeks ago in front of Toronto City Hall. It's me in the bright red jacket, along with students from one of my classes, a class that's called Campaign and Community Organizing. And these are students from, many from Toronto, some from around the world. We have a number of international students. And then there was the lovely person in the skates that got into our picture, not my student. But we were at City Hall because it was the one of the days in which the public could give deputations regarding the city budget and changes to the city budget. Now, the work we were doing in class was on a concept called Movement Action Plan. And this is by an author named Bill Moyer. This is called the MAP model, and it's both a description of social movements, how they have operated to make change in society, but also he's written it as a plan for designing a social movement, a way to develop a series of actions that will bring about change. The first stage of Bill Moyer's map is called normal times, stage 1. There are 8 stages. I'm not going to go through them all, but normal times is called the conditions that grossly violate democracy, freedom, justice, peace, a clean environment, or basic human rights, and so on, but that go unnoticed, he says, where the status quo, either people don't notice it at all, or they just can't quite imagine a world that was different from that. So we have many situations in our world today that, while we know that these situations continuing violate our values, we find it hard, at least collectively, to imagine the world going beyond where we are. And so that is the key to Bill Moyer's MAP model, and part of what we try to instill with our students is the idea of making collective joint action to move the relationship with those with power so that something new can be imagined that wasn't previously imagined. The issue that came up while we were at the city council meeting for the budget just a few weeks ago was that the big proposal was to increase the police budget by $50 million and also add another $50 million to the security budget for the TTC. So that became the focus of a lot of the speakers and certainly of my students at a time when houselessness in Toronto is off the scales, where food bank use is at record levels, and community agencies' budgets are flat at best. This seemed to many people not maybe the best course forward. An equal society, one of the things that we learn from Bill Moyer and others is that an equal society is what creates a safe society. An equal world is a safe world. And we all know this. And we have prophets in our midst, like Black Lives Matter, my students bring up, as saying that there can be a radically different organization of society that doesn't add $100 million to the police and security budget, but really recognizes what is needed to create a more equal society, and that more equal society will be safer. But we live, and this is something I grapple with my students, we live with the fear that there isn't enough really in our world to go around, so we have to grasp at more than our share because we don't believe that everybody getting a fair share or getting an equal share will leave enough for my needs to be met. And so I think the imagination sometimes that we need to have is to believe that a fair, equitable distribution of the world's resources is enough for each of us to be happy. I've got a couple more slides. This is from the US-Mexico border. Imagining borders differently is another kind of iteration of what I wanted to bring up today. So my time with community peacemaker teams over the years has brought me to Mexico, mostly in southern Mexico and Chiapas, but more recently along the US-Mexico border. This picture was taken just before COVID hit, and I spent part of the summer on the US-Mexico border. The tent that you see here was built by colleagues from community peacemaker teams for migrants who are at the US border on the Mexican side waiting to make an asylum claim. And there were about 24 people in this tent waiting because at any time somebody might come out from the US and say, we'll accept an asylum claim. And there were another several dozen people in a shelter nearby. And there's this system, this kind of balloting system to plead your case. But I think what it reminded me this time at the border, our purpose was primarily to accompany the asylum seekers just getting back and forth from the shelter to the border, because the area is controlled by organized crime, and so the migrants were often targeted for extortion by organized crime, and so this is the circumstances in which they are trying to seek asylum, come from a long way, some from Guatemala, some from Honduras, some from Venezuela, some from Cuba, some from I met two families from Russia that were there. And so they wait there, and they live in fear that they're going to be extorted or worse. And there are limits to what kind of a non-government organization can do, but I think we could shift a little bit the reality at the border. That's me actually on the left. I was at a taco truck, and the guy, I wanted to take a picture of myself in front of it, and he decided I had to wear his uniform. So that was an opportunity to do that. But again, I think with borders, the way that we have them, they challenge us to imagine a different way of living with each other. Do the borders need to be what they are? Do they need to be the source of so much suffering and violence that they are today? And that's something that I have been left with. I wanted to end kind of my storytelling today and leave a few minutes for some discussion. There's questions or comments, but I wanted to end with showing this boot. And this boot belonged to a child named Jonathan. Jonathan was 7 years old, and he lived in the jungle in Colombia, in the area where community peacemaker teams has had a team since 2001. And one morning when I was on that team many years ago, I was sleeping. It's hot, it's humid, it's jungle. It's if you can imagine, it's at sea level, but it's 400 kilometers from the ocean up a river that is right at or pretty close to the equator. So it's very muggy. So I found myself sleeping in just a mosquito net outside, just to kind of get a little bit of breeze that might go by. And one morning I was half asleep. It was still dark out, and I noticed a group of people go by the tent that I was sleeping in, and I kind of assumed they were farmers going to their fields to work. We were there accompanying the communities because they were facing organized violence from paramilitary groups, and had asked us to be there with them. They felt that presence of internationals would make their communities a little bit safer. But I got up in the morning and went, and we had breakfast at the nearby school, and I mentioned to the villagers that were with us for breakfast that I had seen, I saw people going off to the fields quite early this morning, and they looked at me funny and they said, well, those weren't farmers. The farmers won't go out in the dark. They wait until the sun rises. And I said, oh no, they were farmers. I could see that they had farm instruments on their shoulders. And they said, well, those would have been guns. And I said, oh, no, I said, there was a little kid at the back. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. And he had some kind of a farm implement as well. And they assured me that it would not have been a farm implement. It would have been a child, and it would have been a gun. And a couple of days later, we heard about a battle between an illegal armed group. This one was the ELN, a guerrilla group, and the federal troops. And that child was involved in the battle and was killed. And his name was Jonathan. And this boot, when I visited that village a few days later, one of the women that lived in that village had this boot that Jonathan had lost it in the commotion. And she gave it to me, and I've used it since to try to talk a little bit about how this is not necessary, that we need to imagine a world where this is not necessary, where children get what they need, and where every child gets what they need. But it does mean that we have to imagine radically different solutions to the way we live with one another, and say that the cost of the way we are doing things right now, the way we're budgeting here in Toronto that leaves thousands of people houseless on the streets of this city, more people than ever going to food banks, that somehow we're not imagining what could be possible there. And part of that, I think, goes back to that fear that we often live with, that we have to grasp at more than our share, because we think that our share alone won't be enough. And we need to believe, I need to remind myself constantly that equitable distribution of resources in the world will mean that I have enough to be happy, to live well. So those are my words today. I'd love to get into a conversation in the last few minutes with you if there are people that want to engage in that.
I think it's my role here, William. I'm just sorry you can't do this in person, but it's my role to thank you for coming to speak with us. And I had the honor and privilege of hearing you speak before, back when you had your Peace Scholarship in 2004, 2006. And I'm very pleased that I feel a greater connection now. I had the opportunity to go to Argentina this past year, and Carlo's wife Nancy and Suzanne Grouet, who Carlo mentioned earlier, they of course have left from Argentina, and saw a lot of the places that you mentioned where the dirty war took place. And for everybody's reference, a really good movie is, if you get a chance, is Argentina 1985, which is about the trials of the military police, and it really talks about what took place there. But no, I just thank you for coming to speak with us about that and about the things that are going on currently, because we can't have a peaceful world in which conflicts are resolved in an equitable fashion when there is such inequality in the world. And I think alternate dispute mechanisms and approaches to resolve these problems are need to be put forward, because what we've done in the past hasn't worked. So, and we do need new ways forward. So on behalf of the club, I'd like to thank you for coming here, and hopefully we can have a little more discussion. If I were there in person, I would be reaching for something to hand to you, and if you were there in person, we'd be exchanging it. But please accept our thanks.
Thank you so much.
Before we get into questions, we do have a bottle of honey that I will pass on to Mary Ellen to pass on to you. Thank you very much. And could we ask you to stop sharing your screen so then we can see everyone, and then we can head on to questions. Deborah, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do actually. A couple comments that you said about how the status quo, we're kind of all stuck in the status quo, and that we don't feel like we have enough impetus or power or interest to kind of move us forward. And I'm just thinking about right now the current healthcare situation and how that it's evolving right now, and how that is going to, I feel as a healthcare provider for 36 years, that it's really going to increase that inequity between the haves and the have-nots, and really impact people that don't have adequate income, or even regular Joes such as myself, if we have to all of a sudden have to start paying for healthcare. So that's a comment, and I don't know if there's an easy solution, but what I'm finding is even when I talk to people and post stuff on Facebook, I'm not really getting much of a reaction. It seems like people have decided this is inevitable and they're just going to accept it. And I that's a scary thought. But the other thing is too, and I put a note in the chat for you, and then perhaps we can connect up with Mary Ellen, is I'm putting together a presentation regarding the environment. That's kind of my secondary passion other than medicine. And I want to link the environment to all our avenues of service, and peace and conflict resolution is huge, because I'm just reading the Global Peace Index and the economic report of 2022. And it's incredible what our environment, how it's impacting peace because of food insecurity, water insecurity, a conflict arising from those issues. So my question to you in chat was just if you have any links or information that you could pass on to perhaps Mary Ellen, and she could pass on to me that I could incorporate into my presentation, I would be forever grateful. But I just wanted to make that comment. I don't know if you have anything regarding the medicine and healthcare at the moment. Anyways, that was my roundabout question. Very long-winded question, but sorry.
I think that it's interesting. My students right now are all doing placements in different social organizations, and this year we decided that they had to facilitate discussions that talk about their community organizations' work, which is mostly service work for people that are marginalized in some way, but they had to connect it to a broader theme. And one of the themes of the three is climate change and climate justice, and that's more and more become a kind of a recognition that a site of inequity is and it continues to be kind of related to the environment, to further inequities created by climate change. But I'll give some thought to this, and so for some materials that I can suggest. Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions in the room?